Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Roleplay Chat. I'm Matt, a game master who can't stop talking about role-playing games. Today on Roleplay Chat, we're going to be breaking some ground and exploring something a little different than we're used to. Instead of talking about, improving your TTRPG play or game mastering, we're going to be focusing on tabletop RPG news. I'm really excited to talk to you about this because I feel like lately, and when I say lately, I mean like in the past year, maybe 2 years, there's been a lot of tabletop RPG news. And I don't know if it's more than usual, but to me, it feels like it's been more than usual. So, anyway, today we're joined by a gamer, a writer, an author, and any award-winning entertainment journalist and reporter with credits in articles for IO9, Polygon, the MIT Immersed magazine, and you likely already know them as being one of the co-founders of Rascal News. Please join me in welcoming Lin Codega to Roleplay Chat. Welcome, Lin. The crowd goes wild.
Oh my god. Wow. Gosh, you make me sound so impressive. I'm really just a nerd in my spare room writing away all day. But yes, that's me. Hello. I've done all of those things.
Yeah, you're definitely super impressive. Even
Oh my
before we
god.
hit recording, you were like, I've been working all day. After we're done, I got to go back to work and investigate this case. So I think
Yeah.
I think it's pretty impressive, at least from my end.
Oh, that's fair enough. I do have a tendency to just sort of think of myself as like a workhorse. And I'm just like, yeah, I work all day. That's what I do. Like that's what I enjoy doing. I enjoy
Mhm,
working,
mhm.
so therefore I work all day. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Happy to chat with Matt about
Yeah, let's do it. Let's
role
chat.
plays.
Let's chat about TTRPG news. And I think,
Ooh.
it's like I was saying in the intro there. I feel like there's just been so much TTRPG news. Like I can't keep up with it. I don't know how you guys, how Rascal News is keeping up with it because
We
every
don't.
2 seconds there's something going on. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
I need to allow you to
Sure.
talk to us a little bit more about yourself. Why don't I pass you the microphone before we get too into the nitty gritty?
Mhm.
I'd like to know, just like real casual, what are your favorite role playing games? What do you like to do? What's your fun in a role playing game?
Yeah, so some of my favorite role-playing games are well, I really like Blades in the Dark. I'm playing a Blades
Oh,
in the Dark campaign right now.
so good.
Um, I think that that's a common one that you've probably heard everyone say, like, "Oh yeah, Blades in the Dark." I really like Into the Odd as
What's
a
that?
it's an OSR style dungeon crawler,
Cool.
very basic stats, very weird, very satirical. It's by I forget who it's by, but it's published by Bastion Land.
Cool.
Anyway, I love that game.
Yeah.
It's just so smart, so good, knows exactly what it wants to do. I really like Hearts Blazing. I wrote a whole blog about it on rascal.news. The title of the blog is Hearts Blazing, You Will Always Be Famous. It is an out of print card based tabletop role playing game that I've used to introduce many, many, many of my friends to tabletop role playing.
Awesome.
And it's wonderful. It's just so well designed, so incredibly self indulgent, just really perfect for teaching people how to let their imaginations really latch on to all of the things that they love and reproduce them in fun and interesting
Yeah,
ways.
that's really, really cool.
So I think those are the three that I can cite off the top of my head. I also am in a long-standing Orbital Blues campaign with my friends, which I really, really enjoy.
Very fun.
Um, yeah, man, I love being sad. I love being sad. I love making my characters sad. And I love my sad space cowboys.
I feel you though. I'm on that. Like when I play a role playing game, I either have to be in like super grim dark, super depressing, like everything goes wrong, everyone's filled with trauma, or we're playing bugs that are in a bake off. You know what I mean?
Oh no, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
really
yeah.
too.
You have to have two sides to it. What else do I really like? I love so many games, so many different kinds of games. I'm currently in the middle of reading Last Train to Bremen by Caro Assertion. That is about scoundrels making deals with devil on the way to hell. It's just good.
That sounds cool. That
It's
sounds like
so good.
very is it very narrative? Like, you seem to do you like the games that are more narrative focused than mechanically inclined? Is that the impression I'm getting anyway?
You are correct. I do like narrative games more than mechanical games. Like there's a level of crunch where once I hit it, I really can't play the game because I'm the kind of person who like I want to know how all of the rules work. And
Mhm,
there is a
mhm.
certain level where it's like when it gets to a certain degree of crunch, it becomes really hard to know all of the rules without being able to like reference something.
That's
Um,
fair.
and I personally am someone who enjoys knowing and understanding how my character can move through a space without attaching myself to a book or a reference sheet. So honestly, even something like D&D, which I feel is like very mid-level crunch, 5 out of 10 when it comes to crunch, is just too much crunch for me. I'm
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
and I mean, same
I'm
with
kinda there with you. Like, when you
Mhm,
start having to keep track of inventory and gold and silver pieces, that kinda stuff, like, it feels the minutia is a little too much for me.
totally.
I I also get like, I'm here to tell a good story. I'm here to be with my friends at a table, having a good time, and I wanna look back and laugh or be in awe of the narrative that we were able to spin together.
Or
And
cry.
or cry. Yeah, or cry. And actually, I think that kind of brings us pretty well into, spinning stories, news stories, right? Like,
Yeah.
if there's gotta be a TTRPG about being a reporter out there, I'm sure. If not, let's do it, Lynn. Like, come on, let's
There's oh my gosh, if you don't mind the clicky clacky of my keyboard for 2 whole
Oh, do it.
seconds.
Yeah, do it. Let's see.
River River House Games. River House Games wrote a very short, I believe it's River House Games. It is. River House Games wrote a very short tabletop role playing game called Athletics, which is about you are queer writers at a sports magazine, and it
Okay,
is your
cool.
job to put in as many homoerotic stories into the magazine as possible without your heterosexual and homophobic editors realizing how sexy these stories are.
That is gold. That
It's
is so cool.
so, so good. But it's also like fantasy stories, so it's like really buff orcs. It's for
Mhm.
um above PG-13 stuff that I can't talk about, but that I won't talk about for the sake of your audience. It's really interesting because it talks. It's one of those games where it engages in that kind of double talk and that kind
Yeah,
of code switching where it's like these stories are gay. You know that like these what you're pitching is very uh will attract a certain kind of audience and is very keyed into like a very specific in group. And your job is to balance how to communicate to that in group while also keeping the out group happy and ignorant. So it's a really fascinating little game and very, very fun. And I've played it a couple times. But yes, Athletics by River House Games. It is $5 on itch.io. It's a really short little game, but yes, there is a game out there for newsrooms.
that sounds fun. That sounds really neat. So what you're telling me then, Lynn, is that Rascal News's next blog is gonna be like you're gonna have a bunch of hidden messaging in it? Is that what you're saying?
Oh my goodness. Luckily,
No, maybe.
luckily at Rascal, all of the owners um understand and respect the queer agenda.
There you go. There you
So we
go.
don't need to double
Awesome.
talk anything.
There you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. 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 Well, so yeah, so as far as news goes though, you were saying that you've been very busy. You've got a lot going on. You got a lot, you got stuff to get to after today's conversation and you're going to have stuff to do for a little while. Lately, I really feel like I've been more plugged in to the TTRPG space.
Mhm.
And I can't help but wonder if the reason why I'm noticing so much more news and so much more, so many more stories are coming out But is that because I'm more plugged in, or is that because there are just more things happening, with WotC, with all the other big publishers out there? I'd like to know from your perspective, because you've been plugged
Mhm.
into this. This is your job to be plugged into this. Is has it been like has there been more drama going on and more scandals?
So I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think it's the fact that the industry is getting bigger and the
Mm,
industry is making more money. You know, D&D had a movie out last year with A-list actors,
yeah.
with Chris Pine.
Yeah. It's on Netflix. It's still in, like, it gets recommended to me, like, often,
Right.
top 10, whatever. Yeah, totally. It's a good
So
point.
so the fact is that like tabletop role playing games are bigger than they've ever been and are only growing. So the news I think grows in response to that. I think that people are, especially after last year with the OGL brouhaha,
Mhm.
people are sort of realizing that the people who have been writing about the news, that have been writing about this news for years, Morris at N World, Charlie Hall at Polygon, Christian Hoffer at Comic Book, all of Dicebreaker. All these people are writing Bell of Lost Souls. There's just so many people out there that have been like covering this for a long time, and it's only now that people are sort of realizing that, or I think it's only now that it's starting to reach the audience that it wants to reach. Because I think for a long time the audience was really, really niche and really, really small, and
Mhm.
now it's growing. And not only is it growing, it's growing industry wise, it's growing in fandom, it's growing in like corporate interests. The interest in tabletop role playing games is no longer just people who play those games, and it's starting
Mhm.
to, I feel, expand at an exponential rate outside of the people who have been paying attention for the past 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me wonder too, like, now that you're saying that, as the audience or the consumer base for role-playing games grows,
Mhm.
it almost makes me think that perhaps there might have always been a lot going on, a lot of scandal perhaps, or things that would have otherwise been unacceptable, but there wasn't a big enough audience. There wasn't a diverse enough audience to
Mhm.
hold the content creators or these companies accountable for making products that don't have, I don't know, AI generated stuff or that are
Mhm.
perhaps explicitly sexual, like explicitly sexist. Like
Yeah.
this stuff existed before, I think.
Mhm.
And now you have folks dissecting it, kinda looking back and saying, "Oh, wow, how did we let this go? How did we," or maybe we didn't. Maybe we didn't let it go, but we didn't have the platform to
Mhm.
push for change. Anyway, I'm kinda going on, like, a weird side rant. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but
No, I think that you're hitting on something here, which is that the tabletop industry as it has grown has slowly but surely gotten a little bit better at remembering that there are people out there who are reporting on this,
Mm,
and that there are ways to fact check and verify and look up what has been said and written in the past. And it's one of those things where people have always like talked about what was happening, and taking it seriously is, I think, new within the past 10 years or so. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where it's like the industry's gotten bigger and people are taking it more seriously now than ever before, and it's important for people to see that there's always been like reporters, citizen journalists, news outlets, blogs, like there have always been ways to find information on the problems that are happening in the space.
mm,
Uh, but it's often, as is often the case, it's hard to keep track of that. It's hard to
mhm,
find that 5 years later. It's hard to find that 6 years later, 7 years later. Um, 10 years later, it's almost impossible, right? 10 years ago, um, a couple, three game journalists wrote a an article called New Games Journalism. And it was an article that rounded up 10 really like journalism genre defying pieces of journalism relating to video games. and you go back to that article now, and it's on the Guardian, so it's easily accessible. But the articles that article cites, half of them are gone.
Mm. Were
And
they on like private websites or things like this that maybe disappeared?
yeah, some of them were
Yeah.
on private blogs, some of them were on, you know, sites that just went under, some of them were on um news sites that just didn't update, some of them are just like not archived properly. So it's one of those things where the internet is forever, but not really.
Yeah.
There's still, in a lot of ways, it's still very ephemeral. Um, so yeah, and then when we have problems in tabletop, the record keeping and the archives of those problems and how people responded and what happened afterwards can sometimes be difficult to find because they are kept maybe in blogs that don't get updated, or the links are broken because something changed, or the news site that it was published on no longer exists, or the original author decided like this is causing me too much problems, I'm just going to take it down. So yeah, I think that like the news has always been newsing. I think that there's just more news now
Mhm.
because it's
Mhm.
just a bigger industry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of, more news and the ephemeral nature of that news, is this perhaps something that Rascal is trying to address? Is this something and maybe this could be an opportunity for me to just ask you to talk to us about Rascal News. Like what is it that you and your team are doing?
Yeah, so Rascal News is a worker owned journalism cooperative that is 3 people. It is me, Rowan Zioli, and Chase Carter, and we are writing news and opinion pieces and doing investigations and interviews and basically anything that you can think of that would go on a news outlet, solely focusing on tabletop role playing games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds super exciting. I hope that everybody who's made it into, 20 minutes of us talking about this is as excited about it as me because
Ah!
you should all go check it out. There's
Yeah.
definitely gonna be a spot in the show notes where it'll be linked up and you can go and you can subscribe and get, the blog posts and the news articles, imagine notified of when they come out. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Rascal.news, we are subscription based. We are entirely supported by our readership. We do not have ads. We do not have sponsors. We don't have any strings attached. It is literally just us and our audience, which means that our site is something that is incredibly clean and readable. And if you go onto our site and you're like, I want to read an article, you will get just that article. You will get no ads, you will get no pop-ups, nothing. Not even from us. Like we don't even put pop-ups on there. It's just like, here it is, you paid for it. Here you go. Um we publish anywhere between 5 and 12 pieces of writing a week, which again, opinion pieces, uh news hits, personal essays, satirical joke blogs, investigations, interviews. Some of my favorite pieces that I've written are where like I'm mostly taking the piss out of myself. Where it's just like, I hope everyone knows I am the butt of the joke here. like, like, I hope everyone knows
Yeah,
I'm the
yeah.
dummy. Like I'm writing this very seriously. Audio, it's an audio medium. I'm using air quotes
Yeah,
very
very
seriously.
seriously.
Uh, but for the most part, I'm just like, I am a ridiculous person. Please laugh.
I
Um,
love that. I love that. It's
and then
it's
of
good to have a balance, right? Some of the more silly stuff, and then some of the bigger like, some of the big news stories like you're talking about.
Yeah,
Um,
so we also do like you just kind of alluded to. We do investigations. You know, Rowan has been really knocking it out of the park with some investigations. She just completed a 3-month investigation into itch.io and how it handles charity bundles.
mm,
So you can read that on the site. I'm doing a a piece right now with Chase and we're like co-bylining it, which I'm really excited about. So we're doing these sorts of deep dives, and then we're also doing like smaller investigations. Like I found a link in between Dungeons and Dragons and the Saudi government. And I was like,
What?
okay, okie dokie. So I wrote like a quick little news piece about that. I'm just like, maybe they should do this. Maybe this is bad. And like it's goofy as heck, but like maybe they should think twice about who they associate with, but apparently not.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
you know, just reviews, interviews, it's kind of like spanning the gamut of like what you would expect out of a news site. Totally free. We send out maybe 2 emails a week and you opt into them. Uh yeah.
Cool.
And
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
we have some free articles and we have a totally free announcement section where it's like anyone can submit an announcement to go on an announcement section. So it's an interesting place to go to find new games and new crowdfunding campaigns and new actual play podcasts. So yeah, that's
Cool.
Rascal. Please subscribe.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I think what you guys what you and the team are doing are is really neat. Having one place to go for a lot of that stuff, especially when there's so much going on. It's
Right.
nice to go somewhere and use that as, like, your springboard, if you would, on the news that's happening.
Yeah.
Um, Especially for some of the heavier stuff. And actually, that kinda leads me into my next question, Lynn. When I was doing my research to develop the questions to ask you today, I noticed that you played a really critical role in spreading the news about the D&D, OGL changes that happened was it a year and a half ago now? I don't even know, something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and
16 months
there
ago.
you go, 16 months ago. So I'd love to know kind of just when you heard about this, when you first got this information, what was going through your mind? How are you feeling? How did you react? Just kind of like to go back and live through that moment. I'm sure it must have been
Oh
pretty
gosh.
stressful. I'm sure there was a lot going on in your head. Um,
So stress. Much
yeah,
stress, many stress. Yeah, so the story of that story really starts in late 2022. So around October, November. I don't know if you recall this, but do you remember a bunch of creators and the open D&D movement? The one D&D movement?
sort of. Yeah. Yes, I
Right.
do.
Yeah, so that started in late 2022 because people had heard through the grapevine that small and third party publishers were getting pulled into meetings with Wizards Coast and being offered sweetheart deals, which they didn't know at the time, but they were being pulled into meetings with Wizards of Coast and under NDA.
Mhm.
And people were like, what is happening? And I wrote pieces, Charlie wrote pieces, we all wrote, we're just like, nothing's happening. Like, this is normal business behavior. Everyone is freaking out. Please calm down. And then I immediately ate crow 3 days later. But I was like, here is a measured analysis of what's going on, which was like NDAs are normal, nothing's gonna happen. There's no way that they would endanger the OGL. Like that's absurd. Like we cannot entertain this. And then of course, 3 weeks later, a new OGL drops into my inbox, and I was like, well, I was wrong.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah. So very
interesting.
blindsided by all of that then.
Yeah. So deeply surprised, very shocked. The more that I read of the updated OGL, which is OGL 1.1, uh, the more surprised I was. It was just so restrictive, so debilitating in a lot of ways to the sort of hmm, the sort of privileges that people were expecting and used to and enjoyed
Mhm.
previously. And I read that, and luckily my editor in chief at the time, whose name is David Ewalt, who has written like a book about Dungeons and Dragons and like is like a lifelong nerd. When I went to his office and I was like, "Hey, I might have the tabletop story of the century here." And
Mhm.
he's like, "You're shitting me." And I'm like, "No, here's the new OGL." And he's Linda. And I'm like, "Yeah, what's happening?" So it was one of those things where I was really lucky to have a chief that deeply understood what I had on my hands
Mhm.
and was willing to let me pursue that and chase that story down as hard as it needed to be chased with as much journalistic rigor as I could give it at that time. And yeah, it was really intense, very like I did not think it would get as big as it did. Because I'm like, this is a licensing agreement. Like I know people aren't gonna like it, but I don't think that many people are gonna care. Turns out I was wrong and I had to eat crow about that too. Where I was like, oh god, people love the
Yeah.
OGL.
Well, it was, it was super complicated. Like, I remember trying to wrap my head about even what the changes meant, Like, it was a legal document. I'm not a lawyer. I don't I don't really know what's going on, but when you start to see a lot of the people whose livelihood, like these small independent creators who are rightfully losing their sanity over this thing because their entire business model
Right.
was dependent on that revenue from like, it was really
Hmm.
quite something to see the community up in arms and a lot of people leaving it.
Hmm.
Like, this renaissance of role-playing games that I think that we're going through right now, I almost think it's because of that. Like, I haven't done any research to assess how many TTRPGs were created before and after, but, like, I'm sure there was a boom that happened there somewhere along the way.
I think right. So I think that the effect of the OGL of Wizards of the Coast attempting to change the OGL is really
Mhm,
undeniable, right? Uh Cobalt Press immediately came out with Black Flag. MCDM announced their work, their official role playing game. Paizo immediately divested and was like, by the way, we're like doing the orc license. And a lot of that I'm just like, there is no way you didn't have this like locked and loaded. I'm just like, oh, you guys were in the NDA meetings, weren't you? You've been planning this for a while, huh?
mhm.
Um, but I never got any confirmation on the thing. Just that is just one journalist's suspicions.
Yes,
Uh
yes.
we're doing a lot of couching here. But yeah. So yeah, I think that you're right where there is like this new boom of fantasy heartbreakers, which have always been around, but certainly now more than previously. And we're definitely seeing people think really hard about what licensing means and what
Mhm,
ownership means, which I think is fascinating and I'm very, very interested in how that'll play out. And yeah, I think when it comes to how difficult that document was to read, it was difficult on purpose.
mhm,
It's not real like and they sort of Wizards of the Coast said that in their communication. They're like, don't worry, we'll like produce a one sheet, like we will dumb it down even further for you guys. Like you don't have to worry, we'll tell you exactly. But I'm just like, I don't trust that one bit. I'm like, the lawyers at a multi-billion-dollar company are going to do everything they can to write a contract that's in keeping with a multi-billion-dollar company. Like they're just
mhm,
going to do that. So parsing through that contract was interesting. Definitely did that like with a lawyer on the phone where I'm like, here's what it says here, here's what it says in the original OGL. Is this the change? And the lawyer, and again, like I was at Geo Media at the time. So we did have like a lawyer on staff, and the lawyer was just like, well, that is an argument that would hold up in a court of law, I think. And I'm like,
mhm.
great, I'm gonna say it. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
if
exactly.
you're like, that's an argument someone would make in a court of law, I'm like, I will say that this is an argument that could be made. Like,
Yeah,
great.
that's it. That's a very lawyer answer to a
Yeah.
lawyer document. But yes, absolutely. As far as the events preceding it being shared, like when your
Hmm.
news story broke, it's now out in the public. Social media was kind of like in this big whirlwind. I'd love to hear from your perspective, like how it affected you, how it affected you personally, professionally, and kind of what came post hitting publish, on that news article.
Post hitting publish, I still had to go back to IO9 and write about whatever The Rock was tweeting about. He was like in a huge, he had his panties in a twist over Black Adam, and he was doing a lot of tweeting. So I had to cover that. I distinctly remember that era of reporting.
That's
Um,
funny.
it is funny. It's very funny. I'm like, yeah, I'm, in the middle of this news cycle that is going to redefine tabletop role playing games and tabletop recording for, you know, at least 5 or 6 years. But sure, let me see what Dwayne The Rock Johnson said about his movie
Mhm,
that
mhm,
nobody saw and zero people liked. Sure. IO9, man. It's just crazy. Uh, but yeah, I think it was like really exciting and overwhelming. I think that staying on top of a breaking news story like that is something that is a crucible for every journalist, and every journalist needs to go through it, where they're just like the reporter on a story like that. Um, yeah, it was really like it was a bit of a rush. It was terrifying. I was so happy when it ended. If I labor in obscurity for the rest of my life, that would be really cool actually. But yeah, I think that it was one of those things where it was really fun. It was also
mhm,
terrifying. I was constantly like trying to figure out how to get the best, most accurate, most relevant information and trying to like verify things and like doing a lot of interviews and yeah, it was just really intense, a lot of work. But I think I don't know if I mentioned while we were like officially recording, but I like working a lot,
mhm,
so I
mhm.
do it a lot. So,
Awesome, awesome.
so it was just one of those things where I was like, yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun, and I distinctly remember like taking phone call, like being out at a bar with friends and like making phone calls and kind of like a dirty alley, just being like, I'm so sorry, I have to like interview a source. And they're like, Linda, it is 8:30. We are 3 drinks in. And I'm like, yeah, order a fourth. I'll be right
I'll be
back.
right back. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna need the 4th after this call, yeah. That's
Exactly.
funny. Well, I mean, I'm glad that you didn't just go into obscurity because I think the work that you're doing with Rascal is really, really cool. So we're gonna get right back to this conversation with Lynn in a minute. We're just gonna take a small break. We're gonna go to the indie showcase where we're gonna be listening to some words from Jarrett about Jarrett's game called I Want to Save the World, but I'm just a level 1 skeleton. So, Jarrett, take it away, and we'll be right back with the discussion with Lynn about news in TTRPGs.
Hi, my name is Jarrett, and I'm the human behind Two Cat Club, a very small, indie RPG studio. It's literally just me and my two cats, but they're asleep. Anyway, I'm here to talk about my latest game called I Want to Save the World, but I'm just a level 1 skeleton. This is a solo RPG, actually my first solo RPG, and as the title suggests, you play as a level 1 skeleton that wants to save the world. This game is inspired by and is really sort of an homage to the Souls-like genre in general, but kind of more specifically the sort of inherent humor that I find in most Souls games. These games present themselves as being so dark and oppressive and dangerous, and they are that, but they're also kind of silly. You're just some random person who wakes up and starts saving the world. It's not particularly clear who you are or why you're there, but for some reason, you and everyone else have just decided that, yeah, you need to go into these dungeons and defeat these bosses, and that's going to fix something. So, how does that look in this game? I couldn't just slap some jokes and references and some tables and call it a Souls-like. Well, I guess I could, but that would suck and wouldn't be worth your money. Also, don't get me wrong, there are jokes and references and tables, but there's also a gameplay loop that I think really captures that Souls-like feel. You're exploring dungeons, you're collecting loot, you're leveling up, and you're dying. Probably dying a lot, because that's how the game is designed to work. So, how does all that trying and dying and trying again happen? Well, it all happens through a pretty light, pretty flexible core mechanic that I think really fits well with the sort of creative freedom that solo RPGs are so good at. There's no game master to tell you what you can and can't do, and the rules of the game don't do that either. There are still rules, and you are still playing a game, but the rules really want to help you tell a story rather than just deciding if you pass or fail a check. In fact, you actually can't fail. When you're making a check, which is that core mechanic, you always apply that check to whatever challenge you're in. Whether you roll a 25 or a 2, you always make progress. Something always happens. The big question is just whether or not you can make enough progress before you die and have to come back to try again. Now, when I say that the game doesn't tell you what you can and can't do, what I mean is that your actions, the dice you roll, and the results are kind of entirely up to you. There are some rules about how you can form dice pools for your checks, but what you choose for these dice to represent is entirely up to you. The game doesn't prescribe that, for example, a certain skill combined with a certain approach always means that you're acting in a certain way. The game lets you decide that, and it's kind of helping you find the story that emerges from the results of the dice. Like in one of my playthroughs, I didn't start out as a particularly social skeleton, so I thought I would become this like fierce warrior that found ancient weapons and used them to destroy the evils lurking within these dungeons. Well, what actually happened was that every time I tried to make a check with a weapon, I rolled horribly and would inevitably die. But whenever I just tried to talk things out, I had amazing rolls, even though talking wasn't even my best skill. So I ended up becoming sort of like this dungeon therapist and actually talked my way through almost the entire game. But in another playthrough, the opposite happened. Whenever I tried to do some kind of social check, I couldn't roll above a 5, but when I wanted to throw around vials of poison or set the whole room on fire, the dice loved it. So I kind of became this absolute terror that cleansed the world in a sea of alchemists' fire, and everyone was afraid of me, and I ruled with an iron fist at the end of the game. So maybe it didn't save the world, but I did at least change it. So anyway, you kind of collaborate with these mechanics rather than being controlled by them, and they just are there to help you tell a story. And every time I've done that, it's come out differently, and it's been really rewarding to, get creative and get loose with my skills and these combinations of attributes and just see what happens. And it's always been a lot of fun. So if any of that sounds good to you, you can find I Want to Save the World, but I'm just a level 1 skeleton on DriveThruRPG, or you can go to 2catclub.com where I've got links to all my stuff. You can also get the game in a bundle with my other games, or it's in a few bundles with games from other creators. But I think it's a fun little game. It has a built-in tutorial so that you're already playing as you're learning, and there's a lot of replayability. It's got plenty of random tables. It's got extra optional game modes. It's got optional co-op rules, or you can bring a GM if you want a little bit of extra influence on what you can and can't do. But in any case, I hope you check it out, and I hope you get a fun story out of it. So thanks for letting me talk about the game. Bye.
No, thank you, Jared. Thank you for sending in a review copy of I Want to Save the World, but I'm just a level 1 skeleton. I had a fun couple of days, rainy Sundays, if you would, playing, with a nice cup of tea and a notebook, and had the opportunity to play through a couple of the random dungeons. So anyway, yeah, it was a lot of fun. I guess the plan now, folks, is to do a quick little review of the game before we jump back into the discussion with Lin about TTRPG journalism and TTRPG news. So let's go through some of the things that I liked and some of the things that I liked a little less about the game. So I guess the first thing I want to mention is the game really, really does feel like a pen and paper version of playing, Dark Souls or any other Souls-like game. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what that means, essentially it's a game where your progress throughout a dungeon or the world resets every time your character dies. And, if you're playing a level 1 skeleton, you could expect to die quite a bit. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that there's no progress at all. The game offers opportunities for you and your character to grow as you work your way through the dungeons. Even though you're dying quite a bit, there's still the opportunity for you to improve your character, or at the very least, even after a failed run, you're going to acquire some items that you can bring back with you and use in future attempts in the dungeon. But for better or for worse, you die often. And I mean, that is expected of the game, but it can be a little tedious at times. So I'd say that if you're not the kind of person who likes games that have that kind of cycle, you might want to go into this a little advised. As far as the things that I really liked about the game, though, the game has a really quirky sense of humor. Jared does a good job of inserting some humor into the dialogue, the treasures, and the challenges that you face. It's also a really fun book to read through. It's quite simple. The rules are very straightforward, and it includes an introductory scenario. So because you're playing as you go and as you learn, it makes it very engaging and very fun. I don't think I mentioned it up until this point, but I Want to Save the World, but I'm Just a Level 1 Skeleton is a solo tabletop role playing game. It's a game that you play on your own, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, or, sitting in a lawn chair outside with a notepad and a pen and paper and some dice. It can be a lot of fun, and to be honest, for the value that you're getting here, I think it's only $7 on itch or something like that. You're definitely going to get, at the very least, 2 or 3 hours worth of fun. Even after that, that's, I think, on the shorter end here. I played through the introductory scenario and 2 dungeons, and that took me about an hour and a half. Writing little story notes as I went along. And a lot of these solo experiences really are what you make them. So the game does a good job of giving you a structured rule set to play, but then allows you, through these interesting prompts and challenges, the opportunity to kind of do some creative writing on the side. It's not necessary, of course, but it does give you that opportunity. So all in all, I think that I Want to Save the World, but I'm Just a Level 1 Skeleton is a fun solo tabletop experience, especially for people who like playing roguelite or Souls-like video games. If you're into that kind of loop of frequent death, slow progression, this is definitely something that you should at least take a look at and consider. And even if you're not into that kind of stuff, I think I Want to Save the World, but I'm Just a Level 1 Skeleton offers an interesting and new take on on the perspective of the character that you're playing, and it's good for a couple of good laughs too. So anyway, check it out. The link's going to be in the show notes. And with that, let's take it back to my conversation with Lin about TTRPG news. Thanks again, Jarrett. And we're back. Thanks for waiting, Lin. you know, the
No
beauty of
problem.
editing is it's a beautiful thing.
Mm.
So we're back talking about TTRPG news. Thank you, Jarrett, for providing me with that review copy of your game. I'm sure folks are going to love it. So yeah, TTRPG news. I think one thing that I don't know if it's definitely not just news specific, but I think lately people have a tendency to want to come to form an opinion as quickly as they can about things. Social media, threads, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, definitely doesn't help in the, this immediately forming an opinion after seeing something right away. I'd
Mhm.
love to know what kind of advice you can give to people listening on how they can gather information to form an opinion properly uh, in the TTRPG context, but then hopefully people can abstract that into a much broader context. But for now,
Mhm.
let's just stick with games because that's otherwise this might be a conversation that takes us all night, I think.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I will fully admit, I know you just said stick to games, but I think that's
Well, if
it's
it's
hard.
easier not to, go please take it away.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason that it's easier not to is because I think that this is more a question about how to journalism
Mm,
more so than how to, form opinions about games. I think a lot of this is just like critical reading, critical, maybe not critical reading. It's you have to kind of let go the desire to be first to say something.
mhm,
And if you don't have anything to say, then like don't say anything. Like you don't have to say anything. Like Marcus Aurelius has absolved you of the need to have a take. Like way back then, way back in like Roman times, he was like, you don't need that.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
but
mhm.
with I think I think one of the ways that we can sort of see this happening is like taking it a little slower when it comes to opinions and creating opinions, like at Rascal. Um, on it was like earlier this week, right? It was like Monday or Tuesday, I think Monday, when Dungeons and Dragons said that it would release the updated systems reference document, so systems reference document 5.2, into the Creative Commons. And when they announced that, they didn't mention the OGL, really. But it was sort of implied that they were not moving forward with the OGL.
Mm.
They didn't directly state that, but one of the things that I saw was I saw a lot of people like writing about that very fast. And I was like, okay, I want to write about this because as we have just discussed here, I have a bit of a history with the OGL. And I was like, ugh, fine. Sorry, Marcus Aurelius, I'm gonna have a take. Um, but I sat with that information for a couple days, and when I wrote something, it wasn't necessarily a hot take, maybe like a lukewarm take, but it was a much more developed take.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that was a lot more about how I really felt about it and how I was analyzing it more so than like my first reactions to that piece of news. So we at Rascal are not in the business of republishing press releases from any company, including Dungeons and Dragons. So just because Dungeons and Dragons puts out this blog that's essentially like a news item, a, just a straight up and down news item, we're not going to just publish something that says this news item happened.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So I was able to like take that news item, think about it, and come up with like, okay, here's an analysis, here's like a critique, here's something to chew on, here's like an idea that could spark other ideas. And I think that that's how we think of our opinions, as opinions that people can build on. And whether that's building on them as in like disagreeing, or building on them as like, oh, that's interesting, let me expand and make it bigger, or building on them as saying like, oh, this is interesting, let me go here and use that same idea in a different context.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to a lot of the very fast opinions that are formed and created and posted, I think that that comes largely from a desire to be seen as first, or an expert, or smart, or as like someone who is deserving of attention. And I think that there's a place for that kind of reporting, and then very often that kind of reaction is simply just noise.
Yeah, and I think like hearing that, it further, I think, cements the idea in my head that we shouldn't be, as consumers of content, news or otherwise, we shouldn't be looking at the first thing we see and then immediately allowing that to be what creates our forever opinion about something. Because, like you're saying, maybe it was just a press release that a corporation created,
Yeah.
pushed out the door, and now you're letting that be what creates the foundation of your opinion on something. So I
Yeah.
it's good to hear that. We should read it,
It's
consume it if you want, but don't let that be the only piece of media that you consume about that product. At least that's my opinion on that.
totally. And I think it's this also goes like other ways, right? Like when I got so I'm signed up for all of the Hasbro investor emails, which means I get 3 to 4 emails a day from Hasbro. A lot
Whew.
of it is like our stocks went up 0.2%, or we filed this thing with the SEC. It's all very boring. And only every now and then is something like interesting. You just have to sort through a lot of low level, low interest, just a lot of stuff. So when I woke up one morning and I saw like, oh, Cynthia Williams has resigned, I was like, this is a breaking news item that like we don't need to have an opinion on, but we can break right now.
Mm-hmm.
We can't post it on the little Twitter. Like, let's do a tweet. So there is moments like that where it's just like a breaking news item that is important to the industry, that we later decided as a team, like, we don't really have anything to add to this. The only thing we did with that breaking news item is tweeted about it and linked to the SEC filing, because we were like, this is important. Like, yeah, let's break it. Like, let's be that name on Twitter and get that attention, because we leveraged that against like our how much time it would take us to do, what kind of attention it would bring us, and whether or not we wanted to write about it in the future. So we thought about it for about 30 minutes. We like had a like A lively
little
debate.
huddle. Yeah, yeah.
Lively debate where I was like, okay, this is a breaking news item. No one else has reported on this. We can just put it out in a tweet and be the people that break it,
Hmm.
probably to as many people as possible. And we can discuss later whether or not we want to expand. So that's what we did. And again, that was a breaking news item. We did not really offer any analysis or critique or opinion. We were just like, this happened. I
That's it.
hope I
Yeah.
hope people care. Like, maybe people care. We care a little bit, but we found we didn't have anything to add to the story, and that was the end of it. And then there's another instance where people accused us of uh having knee-jerk reactions to something. It was very specifically when Daggerheart released its character creation playtest before they released their full playtest. We received that character creation playtest 3 weeks, like maybe 2 to 3 weeks
Hmm.
before the embargo was up and before the full playtest was released. So what we did is we played through the character creation. We wrote an article about it and we developed our social media strategy so that as soon as the embargo was up, our review was up, our video was up, our social media was out, and people accused us, which is totally fair. People were like, "Oh, they got this and they turned this around in an hour for the clicks." And I'm like, "It looks like that, but in actuality, if you go through and you read this and you see what we've done, we are very clear that we received this 2 weeks ago. We like have been working on this for a while." So there is like the other side of the coin there, where sometimes people assume takes are hot, but they've been baking for a while.
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's hard. You can't really know unless you're in there, right? So I appreciate you giving that extra context for sure. Go
Yeah.
for it. You seem like
No,
you
no,
have something
no,
else
no.
to say. No, yeah.
No, it's just, like every now and then, tabletop producers, tabletop news, tabletop publishers are typically not very good with embargoes or giving us stuff in advance just because the industry is just not operating on the same level as, say, publishing
Hmm.
or Hollywood, right? Different levels of maturity within the industries. So it doesn't happen often, but every now and then we get something under embargo or pre-release, and we're able to like do something beforehand. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like
Hopefully it
every now and then.
moves. Hopefully it moves towards that, right? Like
Oh,
that's the hope
yes,
I would think because a
it
lot of
is.
industries do that. I would imagine. I mean, what's the next biggest industry?
What's the
Video
next?
games? Is video games the next thing? I don't.
Well, video games
Board
are
games? They're,
so huge,
they're huge. Yeah, yeah.
huge.
Um,
Board games maybe. Board games are also bigger than tabletop games.
yeah. I
Who
wonder if
knows?
they do. Yeah, I wonder if they do like pre-release stuff. Some of the companies must.
Some of
Uh,
them do. Yeah, I've
yeah,
gotten board games for pre-release from a couple places. But yeah, it's one of those things where there's so many small indie publishers in tabletop games um that I think it's just something that needs to be will come with maturity of the art form.
totally. Yeah, definitely. Awesome. I'm looking at the clock, Lynn, and I don't want to go too far over. So I guess I'll ask you. I guess I'll ask you a two for one in here.
Hit
I'd
me.
love to know, as far as Rascal goes, what makes Rascal News different from some of the companies that you've written for before, or some of the places that we meant, like Dicebreaker, Polygon, some of these names that have come up in today's conversation. What makes
Mhm.
Rascal different? And then, as far as the future for Rascal News, where do you see the future taking Rascal News? So I kind of like to hear the differences now, perhaps,
Mm,
and then in the future, what you've got cooking, what you
yeah,
can share, of course.
totally. So, quite frankly, I think that Rascal is different because it is fully worker owned and fully reader supported. We have no strings attached. We are not trying to be a publishing house. We're not trying to, do designs or actual plays or anything like that. We are really just focused on being a news outlet. We are fully independent, which I think is probably the most unique thing about us, is that like fully, again, no sponsors, fully independent, completely reader supported. And I think that's, yeah, worker owned co-op, I think, is a really important part of this. Obviously there are a lot of places out there that are small indie presses, right? Like N World, Bell of Lost Souls. Like there are places out there that are like small independent news outlets. But I think that we're doing something really cool. I think that like we are focused on, we are not interested in doing stuff for the algorithm. We're not interested in only focusing on Wizards, whatever Wizards Coast is doing. We are covering actual plays with rigor, which I think is, a lot of people have said like, I don't really like actual plays, and then a lot of other people, like more people, have said like, I don't see this covered anywhere else. So I think it's something really important for us to do. I think that we're doing really cool investigations. I think that like we have just like three really tenacious reporters and strong writers that are really working hard for this industry. We have people who are covering tabletop role playing games that like love tabletop role playing games and like really admire the people working in this industry. And yeah, I think that like, if I think that our voice is really important to us. Funny, a little cheeky, we're knowledgeable and authoritative when we have to be, and then at other times I'm just like literally just taking the piss out of myself. Like I wrote a whole blog about how much I hate like immersion. I wrote a whole blog about don't light a candle at my table or I will murder you in sleep. Like I don't need to smell a fantasy tavern. Like my game nights smell like egg rolls. Like
I
stop
love
this.
it.
So I mean, we like have stuff like that where it's like clearly Linda is the joke here.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
clearly Linda is not a serious person. They're writing this like really ridiculous blog. But we do that, and we also at the same time raise questions about like, what is immersion? Do we need it? Are egg rolls immersive? Like, so we balance it out. Um,
I
and
love it.
then yeah, and then we do like really interesting investigations. Roman's investigation that's up right now about itch.io. My investigation, Hasbro and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, is up. Chase and I are working on something really interesting right now. We are following labor stories. Like we're doing a lot of stuff that I feel is pretty important. And I'm hesitating to say unique because I know that so many, I have such a high degree of respect for all of my colleagues out there that are also like doing this like really great reporting. So I don't
Mhm,
want to sort of try and put Rascal on any kind of like editorial pedestal. But yeah, I think we're all working in this space and doing really good work. And I think Rascal is really cool and fun and neat, and you should subscribe. And in 5 years, 2 years, 1 year, I would like to make a living wage. I'd like to pay rent. That would be super cool. We're planning a pledge drive in July, and our one of our goals is like the Rascals can eat.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
The Rascals can pay their bills. So I think that's something that's really important for Rascal. We also want to like literally number one is living wage. Number two is get more people on the site, like get more writers. We're specifically hoping to get more writers of color. We're hoping to get writers from different backgrounds and who live in different places that aren't America. Um, we really want to try and expand the coverage of our site to show just how global this hobby is. Um, and it is not just like three white people from the US. You know, I think
Mhm,
that
mhm.
the hobby is incredible because of its expansiveness, and we want to be able to hire people and not only bring them on as freelancers, but bring them on as like partners in the project that we're building. Um, because if we just bring them on as freelancers, we give them, $300, they write for us, and we're like, okay, great, thank you, bye. Like, we're not doing anything new or different, brave. And I think that for Rascal, we really want to do something that if you are a freelancer you're part of our site, and you're part of the autonomy of the site, and you're part of the work that we are doing. And we want to invite you to be a part of that and part of the decision making that go into running a site. So hopefully I think that's a little different than a lot of other
Cool.
places.
Yeah, no, I think those are really awesome objectives or goals for
Yeah.
Rascal to hit.
So
I hope you do. I hope your fundraiser or your fund drive, what did you call it? A fund
pledge
pledge
drive.
drive. That's I had all the words wrong. But yeah, I
Yeah.
hope the pledge drive goes well. And yeah, I wanted to thank you for being here to talk to me and to talk to the Roleplay Chat audience about Rascal News.
Oh my goodness,
Before
thank
we
you.
say, yeah, my pleasure. Before we say our goodbyes, I want to pass the microphone over to you one last time to say goodbye,
Dangerous.
to remind people where they can, where they can come read all of the interesting articles, bash the immersion article and say that egg rolls, there deserves to be an egg roll scented dungeon candle.
Oh,
That has
good
to happen.
God.
No, I hope that
Yikes.
doesn't exist. Why did I put that into the world?
Alright, yeah. Well, my name is Linda Codega. I often go by Lin online. You can find me at Lin Codega on Twitter. You can find Rascal at Rascal_news on Twitter. And you can sign up at to be a subscribing paying member of Rascal News at rascal.news. That's our URL. It is just rascal.news. We offer subscriptions at $5, $12, or $75 a month. Each level gets you different things. We also have a free subscriber tier where you can just be a $0 lurker, and that will get you about 1 or 2 articles a week.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, yeah, that'll be in the show notes for today's episode, and for people on YouTube, this will be in the descriptor, whatever it's called. So all the links will be there, so you can go check it out. And I highly encourage you all to stay informed about what's going on in the TTRPG space, and what better place to do that than with Lin and the Rascal News team. So thanks, Lin, for being here on Roleplay Chat. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Matt. This has been great.
My pleasure. Bye, everybody. Let's call it a chat. And lastly, if you wanted to support the show, there's a number of ways you can do that with or without spending money. You could support the show for free by spreading the word with your friends, sharing links about the show, and following me on socials. That's at roll_play_chat on all socials. Or you can support the show financially by purchasing things with my affiliate links that you can find in the show notes of today's episode or all other episodes of the show. Or you can sign up to the Patreon, where you get access to shoutouts, as well as extended episodes, about 15-20 minutes of episodes that are only for Patreon subscribers. And as always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters of Roleplay Chat. Thank you to DeMille's Wondrous Works and Jason over at Shadowmane. And last but not least, I wanted to thank Alex and Chase over at Puckabard for allowing me to use their music in the intro and outro for Roleplay Chat. Thanks everybody, and have a good one. See you next time.